let's call the Board of Commissioners meeting together in a joint session with our Deschutes County Planning Commission. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. And we do have cameras and the mics, so this is a recorded meeting. Just reminding myself too, usually I'm sitting up there when it's like that. So at this time, how about let's go around. This is a moment we'll to do a quick introductions and anything else you want to say. Not a big time. We can finish with a little bit more personal or idea information if you'd like. We'll start here on the left.
Okay, I'm Nathan Hofkamp, and I'm on the County Planning Commission.
Patty Dare, I'm Deschutes County Commissioner from Sisters.
Kelsey Kelly, Planning Commissioner from Tumalo.
I'm Will Groves. I'm your planning manager, and it's exciting to see all my favorite people together.
Oh, please, I've got my copy.
Susan Altman, Planning Commissioner from Bend.
I'm Nick Leland, County Administrator, and previously served, for those of you that don't know, as the Community Development Director. So I've been at this table for many years in different capacities now.
Bill Chang, Deschutes County Commissioner. I hold seat number 2. I live in Bend.
And Matt Cyrus, Planning Commission from Sisters.
Jessica Curis, I'm the chair of the Planning Commission from Redmond.
And Tony DeBone, a Southern Deschutes County resident, but we represent everybody. And Will, you're my favorite planning director.
Number one of one.
Yes. So at this time, so Jessica and I were talking before, she just offered for me to run the meeting. So, and usually this is your meeting, right? There you go. So you're happy to have me running it. There you go. Is there any public comment? So I don't see anybody in the room. Is there anyone online with a raised hand feature? Okay, so seeing none, we'll move on. So this is who background and land use interests, I guess, setting the tone for this.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I can set the table for that. So we have for you this evening. This is, of course, an annual meeting that we get together. Really an opportunity to sort of meeting of the minds, have some more informal discussions than we normally have opportunities for. We're thinking, of course, we've had a memo that we've supplied, and you've got a copy there that might set some.
I was thinking, yeah, who don't we have here? Planning commissioners, I guess. Yeah, I was just.
Oh, for sure. Patrick.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And Tony isn't here either.
Yep, okay, there we go. So I was, yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, 2 planning commissioners not here. Sorry. Please proceed. Yeah.
So, we of course, there's a bunch of things that we're all working on together. The board's been appraised to me of these things, planning commission as well. We have these sort of as some example topics that you might want to dig into. Certainly remember we're talking about the comprehensive plan update. That's, been a multi-year effort, tremendous community engagement. And that document is coming into a nice draft form and is on its way shortly to the planning commission for hearings. Additionally, moving at the same time, the transportation system plan update. So that's also a long public engagement process dealing with the materials collectors, bicycles, pedestrians, transit, freight movements. And there are maps and plans that go in association with that. And that is scheduled for deliberation before the Planning Commission on October 12th, before moving on to the board. Another big one we've got going is the Tumalo Community Plan. So that's one of our regional plans. And we've been working with the people of Tumalo to set an overall vision and goals and policies. A lot of community outreach there, a lot of different feelings about how things should operate. Definitely some differences in people who live in Tumalo versus people who live in the greater Tumalo area about what they'd like to see for the community, but a lot of passion about that community. Something that we've talked to you all about recently is the wildfire mapping update. That comes out of Senate Bill 762 and Senate Bill 80, just briefly to kind of set the table on that one. That is the mapping that the Oregon Department of Forestry and Oregon State University had been directed by the legislature to roll out. The initial rollout of that map produced a significant amount of controversy and was brought back in for some refinement and additional discussion on September 21st. The initial new copies of those maps were rolled out to our set of counties. We had an opportunity to comment on those. My understanding is that some of the concerns from the previous maps remained about sort of confusion about adjacent properties that seemed to be similarly situated, mapped similarly. Some concerns about agricultural land mapping continue to remain. A big statewide effort, lots of public engagement coming with that one. Finally, and something that's really on, I got 2 more. Something that's on our mind, of course, is the Senate Bill 1013 recreational vehicle provision. So that's something that came out of this year's legislature that allows counties at their discretion to to allow a recreational vehicle as a permanent tenancy on a rurally residentially zoned property. Some similarities to ADUs, some differences. It's an exciting opportunity. It comes with some of the difficulties that we've seen with recreational vehicle occupancy. In terms of our code compliance issues, some of those generate a lot of our code compliance issues. And so it'll be interesting to see how the Planning Commission and the board balance neighbor protections and neighborhood concerns versus this important opportunity to give people a safe place to stay. Finally, the most, I think it's a little nerdy, but it eats up a lot of my attention is House Bill 3197. That's that clear and objective standard provision that we talked about. There's some significant history going back years and years, but most importantly to 2017 and a case out of Washington County that said that when you're talking about when local governments have regulation about housing, those regulations need to be clear and objective. So you can't have things like orderly or compatible or suitable. You have to explain very clearly what the option is. And once you've done that, you can have an alternative approach that has subjective standards. So you can, I've used the metaphor before. It's like going into a restaurant that, you need to be able to order on the menu. If you want, your hamburger with cheese, you can order that. If you need it, some other way, there's a process for it. But at least this basic thing, people can come in and say, if I do X, Y, and Z, I will walk out with a permit. And it's the idea is it can limit appeals, limit confusion, help set both neighbor and property owner expectations. But there's some significant effort in spelling things out. One of the things I like to bring up is we have in our subdivision code that the subdivision needs to contribute to orderly development, and that we ask ultimately the board, first hearings officers and the board, to determine if the development is orderly. And if instead you try to spell out what orderly means and capture all potential things that might be disorderly, you turn into pages and pages of code. So, trying to figure out how to write all that in a way that provides an attractive and streamlined option for people to get to an approval. It's a significant lift. Good news is that we have been awarded, I don't know if this has been announced yet, we have been awarded the DLCD grant. And so in coordination with that, DLCD will assign a consulting group to us to provide resources to help support that effort to do those updates. So we'll be coming forward to both bodies to keep you appraised of how we're approaching that. But we're expecting in the next month or so to be assigned consulting resources. And those, the consultant, the setup's a little unusual. It comes with they come with their own dollars. So they come listen to the county, hear what we need. They develop a scope of work. They take that in their proposed budget to DLCD, and DLCD pays the check, which is real different than our normal grant process, wherein we receive a lump of money and manage it. So it'll be interesting to see how that works, but we're grateful for the additional resources and support. It seems likely that will be at least to some advantage of us in the process. And of course, anything else that might be on your mind. I know that's a little bit of a speed run through that, but I think at prior meetings, this has been an opportunity for either board to talk about, what's on your mind, particularly with regard to those projects and just generally how things are going.
So how much is the DLCD grant?
It's a mystery. So
I knew that was going to be a hard question.
yeah, no. So this is specifically how it's designed. There's a significant pool of money. And so how it works is they will assign a consultant to us. We will then work with that consultant and say, here's what our need is. Their consultant will develop a scope of work and take that proposed budget to DLCD, and DLCD will allocate dollars for them to do that work. But the cumulative pile of money is significant. So I think the resources that are coming to help are significant. And I've gotten to see some of the consultant teams that are available to us, and all of them have some experience with this type of work. And all of them, either we or other local governments have worked successfully with in the past. So I'm optimistic that this is going to be a real help.
So I'd like to stay on this topic a little bit. In fact, maybe just work backwards through this memo a little bit for these topics, because it all ends up with a comprehensive plan, which is kind of work. But clear and objective standards, DLCD's resources. When I think about this project. I don't know if each one of the planning commissioners have thought about this, but this is big deal. This is like a freight train coming at us, and it isn't going to stop. Or maybe we'll be able to extend the time at the legislature. That's probably the most valuable thing we can do, because there's a lot of value in getting there. Clear and objective standards for permits is the goal, but this could be like an octopus that's coming at us from all different angles. My question would be, how much is the planning commission going to be involved in kind of setting the scope or scale or tone of the work? Do you have a feel for that?
Yeah, so the DLCD grant came with some sample scopes of work, and they all included significant involvement with both the citizen involvement body, in this case, the planning commission, as well as ultimately the board of county commissioners. So you would see us working with the consultant to describe the problem. They would propose a solution, a workflow, a approach to it that we would then circle back to our bodies, both of you, and say, hey, here's how, this is what they see the issue as, this is what the resources they have. We, together with them, propose this is the way to dig into this problem, and then receive your feedback and then take that forward as they build a process. I think that some interesting questions come out, certainly the subdivision code has some, that is supposed to be relatively mechanical in terms of its approach, and it's probably gonna be relatively easier to fix. This clear and objective standards has affected cities within their urban growth boundaries, and specifically targeted to their needed housing for, over a decade. So this type of code fix isn't something new. The city of Eugene has gone through it. City of Bend has dealt with it as well. So I think that part's going to be relatively straightforward. I think that's mostly just spelling out ambiguous terms. And I think I've mentioned to all of you previously, something as basic as, we allow single family dwellings. And, if you got 10 planners in the room and asked what that definition of single family meant, they'd all have different opinions about it. So, how do you say objectively what it means? We've used a single family dwelling as a proxy for limiting rural development. But, single family could be, 20 people. It could be, we also see situations where people, the state now says that you can't regulate occupancy of a dwelling based on kinship. So, what happens when, a house in Deschutes River Woods, somebody's like, 18 of me and my buddies skiing are now hanging out in bunks in rooms. Is that change the transportation demands, all those sorts of things? So I think even something as basic as being clear and objective about what
With 6 Bridger vans and 4 Subarus, right?
Yeah. So I think that there's going to be people have been down this path before us. And at the same time, I think it's going to be a real community discussion about what that means. And I think that's where it gets more broadly interesting. When we come into something like, it's our understanding right now that one of the things that would come out of this is, for example, in the wildlife area, if you're in a deer wildlife area and you want to do a cluster subdivision. So you want to get some lots, the way you're allowed to get at it is through clustering those lots. There's an open space lot, the management of that parcel. Typically you have a biologist who's working with ODF and W to figure out what beneficial uses can be put to the open space parcel. All of that is spelled out as suitable and compatible and negotiations. So what we anticipate is that we're going to have to write a very clear code that says your open space parcel will meet the goal of protecting wildlife in this case if you do X, Y, and Z. And I think we found out recently that people really have strong and different feelings about what's an appropriate ask in that. And so I see that as like one where, as we try to make things clear, I think we're going to be having a discussion as a community about what that looks like. I think that some things that have been previously set in code and, haven't been renegotiated in a long time will feel relatively open.
So clear and objective, I qualify for all this. I have my permit. It's not appealable. Is that kind of one of the scenarios?
It will be appealable, but that appeal, the idea is that if you've done a good job of making the code and you say, if you have 5 acres and the open space is 2 acres, yep, and you propose no uses other than habitat restoration in the open space, and habitat restoration consists of X, Y, and Z and not A, B, and C, then you walk out with the permit. And to the extent there's an appeal, it would be an appeal that somebody would say, well, you didn't do those things correctly. And the more clear and objective they are, the less likely the notion is that there would be confusion or discretion or subjectivity to appeal.
And then, so just like you mentioned, so all that negotiation, what clear and objective is going to go in the code is going to be very much for interpretation, debate, and discussion to get to this process.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of work.
Yes, you can imagine switching back to kind of the original metaphor is if there's going to be one thing on the menu and it's going to be either a cheeseburger or a hamburger, people are going to have very strong feelings about which one's the on menu option and will, have strong feelings about that.
The question I have though is, will the consultant be providing different menus for then the planning commission, the board, the community to select from for what you want to be in clear and objective? Because there's not just one path, as you mentioned, for clear and objective. So will they be providing, here's option A, option B, option C? And of course, when you think about the magnitude, there's a lot of that, as opposed to just saying, well, here's what your code says, here's option A, and we can look at other versions of that if you wish. I mean, are they going to be the ones that are coming up with the various options for the group to discuss? I mean, I'm just curious if you know how that's going to play out yet.
I really don't. What I've anticipated is that they're an asset to our department as opposed to somebody coming to tell us how to do this. They're a resource that we can tap or ignore if for some reason that wasn't going well. But given the consultants, I suspect it will go well. And what I anticipate will happen is that they'll come and say, hey, what do you see as the work to be done? And we would say, that we would on some of these things see, or we'd be looking for your expertise with code to identify places that aren't clear and objective. Where there isn't clear and objective, and we as staff anticipate that there would be a place that there would be, community diversity of opinion about how that was gone forward. We would probably lay out some initial paths and, take a guess at what happens. That's what we do for the planning commission regularly, is we try to take a guess about, among all the viewpoints that are out there, which ones are going to be interesting to the PC, what's going to be interesting to the board. Make sure that those are on there and go through the public engagement, because we don't always guess right. People come forward and say, hey, this is really important. And so we can put that on the menu. The planning commission, let's say that we come into the planning commission where we say, we've got two approaches for you, as a citizen involvement body. You might come back and say, there's a third you need to think about as well. We've heard from our constituents. I have personal experience. I have an idea that this clear and objective standard, so the fear of clear and objective standards is that they're dead ends. That you've gone to all this effort to create this simple, clear, easy to use example that nobody wants. If you wanted to, for example, let's say that you wanted a clear and objective standard for cluster subdivisions in the wildlife area. A clear and objective standard would be no, never. Right? Super clear, unappealable, everybody knows how it works, doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So, it's tricky to write something that, if you go through all this effort and you write a code that nobody wants to use, it didn't work. And then you have, I imagine what happens at the end is you have as a subjective opportunity what the code is now. It's like, if you don't like this clear and objective standard, applicant, you can default back to a subjective process. But, then we haven't really created any value through this effort. So that's really the rub, is creating streamlined options that people want and that the community all, through the public process that they all engage in and are willing to support.
Sure, there'll be kind of code examples that'll come up from other jurisdictions. All of a sudden it'll be like, oh, I see the scenarios here and what it looks like in words. And then we'll apply what the different topics are. Because I see you have the different zones, unincorporated communities, floodplain, landscape management, sensitive bird and mammal. So there'd be all kinds of layers to this also. I just want to put a house on my property, man.
You make it easy.
Yeah.
Do you own your property? Yes.
Do it.
Yeah. So, okay, well, any discussion, as I said.
The only other piece I would offer is that there was even confusion about this last week at the Association of County meeting in Klamath County, where the Association of Oregon County staff they made the statement to the commissioners, and I heard it from one of you immediately. No, this just applies in urban growth boundaries. And so I was immediately contacting Peter, as you were texting, so and so there's still confusion about this out there among some. Unfortunately, they clarified it. Yes, this is required.
Well, it sounds like, the planning directors, planning managers, everybody was kind of up to speed, but yeah, policy wise, at the commissioner roundtable in Klamath Falls last week, it was stated that, oh, no, we don't need to worry about that. And we were pointed out that, no, this is a big deal and it's coming right at us.
She has a new baby.
Yeah, she has an excuse.
Give her a break.
Well, it's just different information. Any other?
Also important to understand where this is coming from. This is coming from certain, builder, developer interests who want more fair and objective standards. And I know that there are members of our local building community, people like Ken Katzrock are very involved in this effort at the state level. So it'll be really interesting to see whether they are excited at the end of this or whether they regret what they wished for.
Yeah, it is good to back it up a step. I mean, really the goal, what's been driving this is that Oregon analysis shows that Oregon has underproduced housing against, what it had sought to do. And we see the effects of that everywhere, from us trying to hire to, people, living in various parts of the county. And so the idea is that to the extent that you streamline some of these processes, that you can get people to housing. And that's why this is specifically targeted to housing. So we don't have to build clear and objective standards for a biomass plant, for example. This is targeted specifically to housing. And the hope is that the result is that we produce more of it in an efficient way. So definitely builders in favor of it, but I think we said before, planning staff, is in favor of it as well. There's lots of people in my office who'd love to buy a house and can't. So, if this works well and it reduces the cost of building those houses and the time to get those things, on the ground, there's lots of reasons to like that.
The underlying assumption, though, is that it's land use regulation and the land use planning system that's holding us back from building housing, which is if you think it's all about the land use planning system, then in my opinion, you're being oversimplistic about the issues and ignoring other factors such as infrastructure funding.
I guess the short version is supply and demand. How do you generate supply? Oh, well, you've got two sides. You got demand and you got supply, and you have to affect one or the other in order to.
Yeah, well, there is a lot more to it than that, because underinvestment in enabling factors like infrastructure disrupts supply and demand dynamics.
Well, but I mean, but that affects supply.
And don't forget, the
Infrastructure.
mortgage just went up to 7.41. So I think-
There's other factors.
I think that's really an enormous disruptor because the worst since 2001, I believe.
It all just goes to say that land use isn't a silver bullet. So
I would agree.
But that's the topic here. Land use. So as I say, like working our way.
context of, I mean, don't crank on the lever that you have available if you know that the whole machine, the rest of the machine is broken.
Well, I think you're kind of saying that if we go about this right, like either way we're doing it. So our options are go about it in a way that produces some value or go about it in a way that doesn't really produce much value.
Yeah, there was a court case where a jurisdiction produced a clear and objective standard that was really a poison pill, and the courts didn't like that.
Oh,
Said,
interesting.
the purpose of this is to make it easier and to provide a regulatory pathway. And if the things, it's just a labyrinth that leads to a dead end, you're not succeeding at that. So that's the tricky part, is really providing, if we're trying to provide a streamlined path and it's worse than the path we had before, that's not a success.
Do you feel like this is going to be kind of like our comprehensive plan process in the sense of, like you said, having a consultant help identify some issues and then getting public input on things that we think the public are probably going to have differing opinions on, and then ultimately trying to distill down that testimony to pass on to the board?
Yeah, I think that of course, being a planner, we love community engagement and we would have, years of community engagement, never do anything because we just love getting people talking. But, eventually we need to get there. In this case, we need to get there by June 2025. So we're going to have to, I think what we'll do is we'll probably split the effort out into different modules. I think, the subdivision code's relatively easy. I think the wildlife code's going to be relatively hard and probably litigated before it's over. And so, we'll break it out into modules and try to tease out what, are important interests as we move forward with those, and those that have more controversy do, or that we feel like we don't have a good notion about what people might be interested in, doing more engagement for those, and for things that we think are relatively straightforward, starting out with, maybe less engagement for that. But in the end, it all comes through both of your bodies for hearings. And at that point, we'll capture whatever's out there, but we really love to get it early, flesh it out, try to put it into a package that makes it easier for both boards to work through.
Looking at the topic list, it just seems like it's going to be a lot of pretty big issues. And maybe it's lucky that this is happening right after the comprehensive plan process, so that at least we know what people think in a general broad sense, even though this is like on the code level. I mean, it just seems kind of ironic or coincidental, like we just did this big conversation about things at the high level of topic level, and then now we're like, okay, now we're gonna do a bunch of things to the actual code. So
Yeah, and I mean, that's really what's supposed to come out of a comprehensive planning process, is figure out how people have changed in the past decade and what they want and what, their elected representatives, want for, the community, and then to turn that into something, as opposed to, just produce a phone book of paper and set it on a shelf somewhere.
So basically, if I understand what you're saying, is what we're looking at is a clear path to a yes, as opposed to a clear path to a no.
Exactly. And
I mean, we can have a clear path either way.
right, and the debate will be the rigor of that path, so for example, you might have something that says, yes, you can have a subdivision, but you will sidewalk, curb and gutter the whole thing, even if it's, relatively rural. That would be clear and objective, but probably overkill for, what's actually needed to support the rural resources there. So, what is the right answer? Is it, 6 inches of gravel, is it paved in some circumstances? Our code deals with some of that pretty well right now, but, being very mechanical lockstep, you have X lots of Y size, then you're in Z roads, or in the alternative. And this is the nice thing about it. You can, if there's an error in that system, or it doesn't work in a particular situation, then you can drop out to a variance procedure or to a subjective process. So you haven't locked everybody into this one size fits all process, but you've created at least one line of approach that has a relatively clear outcome.
So theoretically, what you've got is an online process where you check the boxes, and if the boxes are all checked properly, you get to an approval at the end.
Yes. That's the dream.
So
Well,
it takes 10 minutes to get an approval.
Well, it's early days, and this, I'm new to this, and I'm going to keep an open mind. I would hesitate to front load it as saying that it's a pathway to being more permissive and less restrictive. We don't know that yet. So let's see how things play out, how it comes down the road. In many cases, a good, clear, decisive no, for instance, in regards to proposed city of Mountain View, is as useful as a permissive yes. So let's not say it's getting to yes. It's in some cases it might be getting to no. Let's see how it plays out.
Well, and I agree with that too, though. I mean, because a sob story, a heartfelt sob story on the phone about, I've been trying to do this for years and they said it couldn't be done, but I'm going to keep trying. And it's like, okay, well, the answer was no up front, but you kept trying. What am I supposed to do with this? So as I say, balance that with private property rights, or, just some residential lot in a neighborhood too. I mean, what's the no for, and get clear right up front.
I imagine there would be a lot of, like you were saying, community involvement, especially with regard to wildlife, to go along with what Joe Pierce said when we had so much testimony about the Coal 5 text amendments, and how people were very passionate on one side or the other, and well, I can't lose my property now because X, Y, or Z, and maybe you want to have these amenities, and so it will be interesting to see how that plays out in the different subzones and overlays.
So moving the conversation along, going backwards here, if we look at recreational vehicle discussion, that's new code. And that could be written with clear and objective code language. So it's like we can already practice on some of the, things that are going to be possible in our code. So I just wanted to point that out up front too.
We have the ADU code is built to be clear and objective. And it gets a little wordy at times. It gets
Could
really
they be
specific.
done together? The RV and the ADU.
There would be reason to run them in parallel, generally speaking, but the ADU is so close to the finish line. And the RV one, we've got a long ways to go.
No, I meant, can you have an RV where you have an ADU?
Can you have both?
Yeah,
Oh,
that's my question.
That would be a choice. That
You
would-
cannot have both.
No, that would be, I don't think it's precluded. I need to look. What's that on here?
I believe you cannot do the RV if there's more than one dwelling.
Ah.
But is an ADU a dwelling?
So it sounds like,
Accessory dwelling.
Like, that does have the word dwelling in it, so yeah, that's fair.
and I think, Tanya, that's precluded in the statute. Thanks.
State's already given us guidance on that up front. As I say, when it comes to these recreational vehicles, I generally support this Ramada, a roof structure over it. Southern Deschutes County, we can get those years where it's just a couple feet of snow and it is heavy. So then that'd be an expensive component. And then it's all about septic after that, a minimal cost RV rental spot, parking it right in next to your home on a rural lot could trigger a $10,000 or $15,000 up or even more upgrade to your septic system, for capacity. Because if you have a, whatever, 800-gallon tank or whatever, some number, and you have to replace the tank, and then that triggers a drain field or a nitrate reducing system. That simple rental could end up costing a lot of money in infrastructure up front. It's just a scenario, but I could see that happening.
When we met with the sister city council last night and Councilor Ross. Really wanted to tell us about park RVs. It's like a specific program or a model, and he said that they're much more. The construction is really beefy. So he said, if you have this kind of RV, maybe you don't need some kind of roof structure over it. So I mean, just can make our job more complex. I mean, if there are types of RVs where you don't have to worry about the roof and requiring them to build this whole additional structure is really burns.
Yeah, so if there's a scenario in there, let's go find it. That's fine.
They look like little houses.
Yeah.
And I told them right when we start talking about tiny houses, and he said, "Oh no, tiny houses, you don't register that with DMV. Park, these park RVs, you register with the DMV, so it's already that's one of the criteria in hospital template. So all good. So it already has a point.
Yeah, they can. So the main difference, both regular RVs and park model RVs are titled through DMV. Regular RVs can be no more than 8.5 feet wide. So that, they're designed to go down travel lanes with regularity. Park models RVs can be over 8.5 feet wide, can't be more than 400 square feet of area cumulatively. So there's, they've got some different configurations, but I think the notion with the park model RV is it's not designed for daily towing, but there's certainly some really attractive,
They have little upstairs.
yeah.
Register that with the DMV.
Well, so there was a there was a scenario at 1,000 Trails where somebody had a model that was something like this.
Mhm.
And I think it boiled down to, is it taxable as private property or as a house or not, or something? I forget what it was. But yeah, there was like, this guy was stuck in this loop. He's like, well, I went to the DMV and I got a tax bill for it and I'm renting this spot and I caught an RV. So I mean, we got to get real clear on that because there was some conundrum there for somebody.
Everybody's struggling with it. I mean, these are really platypus, years ago, the idea that you would have a towable house seemed kind of inconceivable, and now we're seeing all permutations of them.
Yeah.
Definitely a lot of interest.
Just a mini mobile home.
Yeah.
Mini Single wide.
Yeah.
I would call that tiny.
But yeah, the DMV registered, I think, is under this one. So, well, so that's a project, coming through the process right now. Planning Commission will be seeing that soon, or what? Have they seen it at all yet? or-
We're just about to kick off.
Yeah,
the
okay.
process. So Tanya here is about to briefly set off the PAPA. That's our initial notice to deal.
Yep, okay.
We're headed in that direction. We have.
Planning commission hearing is November 9th. The work session is not.
For the people on Zoom, if any, that was November 9th for the hearing.
And this is not for EFU.
No, it has to be MUA 10, RR 10, a couple other zones near the city, but residential zones,
But so it would not be allowed in the EFU.
no. And that's a statutory limit.
So that'll come to the planning commission on the 12th,
Mhm.
along with the TSP.
Yes, the 12th is a busy night.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Mhm.
When you reference a pop-up, I'm not sure if everybody understands what a pop-up is.
Post amendment plan, post amendment.
Post-acknowledgement plan amendment.
Plan amendment. Yeah, oh boy. Nick is our DLC. Yeah, do you want to talk about?
It's helpful. Well, it's just an amendment to the code or to a
Yes.
comprehensive plan,
Mhm.
but that's the official name.
Yeah,
It's-
it has an interesting acronym. There was a time where DLCD came through and tidied up everyone's codes aggressively. And at that point, your plans were acknowledged. And so anything that happens after that is a post-acknowledgement plan amendment. Which, there were some rules for things before that.
So post acknowledgement of the comprehensive plan.
Mhm.
So then we'll republish a comprehensive plan, which is kind of like the new start for a period of time.
Yeah.
Anything else on that recreational vehicle? Walking back through the memo here. So let's just say, stepping backwards, wildlife. Oh, yeah, sure. Please.
Something that we're.
For RV?
Yeah, for RVs. I wonder if there's any initial impressions, when we think about this, we think about, I kind of set this out in the beginning, the tremendous opportunity this is for, for people to have a safe place to stay. We've underprovided RV parks. There's lots of people out there. If we had, an RV park, they'd love to have hookups. They're on disability or they've got a job in town, but they just can't find a place to live other than this. Would love to have a secure place. At the same time, these RV tenancies have been, we have that 6 out of 12 month provision. So you can be on a property that doesn't have a dwelling under the code currently for 6 months out of 12. It was designed for snowbirds. And some of these have a lot of community, the neighborhood has struggles with it. People are using burn barrels and sometimes those fires get out of control and there's not storage associated with the RV. So you see a lot of outdoor storage of items. You see some, I think I mentioned disorderly handling of wastewater. So I think there's going to be a real community. I suspect the community discussion will be people who would like to live in one of these situations. There's people who would enjoy the economic opportunity of having it on their property. I think there's also going to be neighbors who are worried about visual, other types of hazard impacts. And I'm wondering if any of you have any preliminary thoughts as we're cobbling the code together and working through that, about the balance between those things and, where the priorities lie.
Something that I've observed from the realm of short-term rentals
Mhm.
is that when the owner of the short-term rental is on the same property as the short-term rental, people behave a whole lot better than when the short-term rentals go off by themselves. So in this case, I would expect that, you know, the people in an RV that's hosted by the person in the dwelling right next door is going to behave a lot differently than the person in the RV that's on a otherwise vacant lot.
And just for the benefit of the group, the legislation requires that one, there is a single family residence as a precursor to having this, and two, that is owner occupied.
Okay.
So it can't be rented out or be in some other vacation occupancy and then also have the RV.
I can see both sides.
Mhm.
I mean, I think there's certainly gonna need to be some screening requirements, and things to keep it aesthetically pleasing to the rest of the neighbors. But the other hand, you know, the big discussion we just had in Sisters over the last 2 months over the winter shelter and the homelessness and all this. One of the things that came up a number of times was if there was actually a discussion about coming to the county and asking if there was a way of allowing RVs on some of the individual properties so people could provide hookups and places for some of the homeless to actually set up in a less expensive RV with some hookups to provide housing for these people. And that there were a lot of folks in the community that said they would do that and help these folks and eliminate the homeless problem in the area if there was an ability to do this. So this may solve some of that other problem.
I have somebody that needs that. She's found a trailer, so let me know who I should call or tell her to call.
At the hearing, I talked to a couple of people about. Let them know it was
So
coming.
I wasn't aware this was coming down the pike, but this very topic came up several times in that discussion, so.
Would wonder how your county code enforcement people, what kind of input they would have, because I would imagine a common narrative that they have is going out and seeing some of these sites that on private or public lands, squatting or semi-legit, and the kind of disastrous circumstances, dangerous to the individuals themselves and to others, impacts on wildlife and so forth. If code enforcement thought that greater clarity here, speaking of clear and objective standards, but applied to RVs might make their job less heartless when they have to approach someone and enforce and say, well, there are these alternatives that are legitimate and regulated and safe and secure and sewered and supplied with services. So I'd be curious what code enforcement people think, but yeah.
You know, the organizations that run safe parking programs or, you know, homeless response, they are very interested in this.
Mhm.
It's a really different because, you know, safe parking, they're always trying to find places, you know, hey, can you put up, you know, 5 RVs on your site? And this is only one, and it'll be very dispersed, but similarly, there are a lot of people who may be able to have an RV, but they do not have a long-term place to put it, and they can't afford a stick-built home or to pay rent in a very expensive market. So there's some real opportunities here.
I mean, we're always talking about how can we get more working class people places to live here. And personally, I'd much rather have, you know, if I had a family member or somebody who needed or friend who needed a place to stay, I'd be in a position to allow them to stay on my property, but that would also bring a worker to the area who might be able to build someone else's home because they're a construction worker or something like that, or be a healthcare worker and help take care of people who are sick. So people work. Yeah. So it's not just for maybe people who are currently houseless, but people who are, you know, currently maybe in an apartment or a house or something like that and would like to stay here. But I mean, I can think of at least one friend who was thinking of leaving the area because she'd like to live on her own and it's too expensive for her to live on her own. So she's going to move somewhere else where she can live on her own. And I was like, oh, you know, then we have this ADU thing that maybe we could build you an ADU and you could stay here.
So this would be a lot less expensive and a lot quicker to implement than an ADU.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's what I've been saying all along about the wage. I built it in, I didn't build it. I used a contractor to build it for me. I got an ADU on top of my garage. And it is not a moneymaker.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
something that I
yeah.
did that I'm happy I did. That's, providing 1 unit of missing middle housing, but the cost is going to be a major barrier to us getting a significant number of ADUs once they are authorized under state land use. And this is a very different kettle of fish because
This might actually have an impact on some of the homeless issue.
They're actually $125 a square foot. I just looked them up. They're made in Woodburn and you can use your American Express card to buy the park. So but it's only like 400 square feet.
Oh, to buy the unit, I was just
Right.
thinking as far as just a hookup where somebody's got an RV.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
those are so nice looking.
But I mean, you've got so many older ones out there, you can get a pretty livable RV for 10 grand most anywhere.
Well, my person's found one for $550, so.
That's even better.
Wow.
there's there's both strands. You can, under this legislation, you can, a person who is seeking a place to park their RV,
Right.
they have an opportunity, and a homeowner who wants to, provide a rental unit of housing, they could buy the RV and have it available and rent it out. So
I agree.
it's pretty interesting.
I mean, for worst case, an upgraded septic system, you got a spot in short order.
And it's cheaper than a $200,000 ADU.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Then where does a decision get made about a transportation system charge or SDC? And not that I'm advocating for it, but I'm worried that,
Yeah.
by the way, there's this too. Is SDC required or not, or when is that choice made?
So we are having those discussions with the road department. Of course, they, in collaboration and under direction of the board, set those SDCs, and we're still working on those preliminary discussions about how they at least left to themselves would approach that. I'm sure that's going to ultimately come your way for consultation and blessing.
So system development charge for one residential development, I think it's like $4,800 right now. I think Chris Jody mentioned that they could justify a half of an SDC for an ADU. I don't know that we've talked about it for this yet, but as I say, that's another one coming down the pike for us here.
I would be concerned about, I think that's a really good point, but also appropriate sideboards so that we keep it, so that we encourage and regulate it so that it is the kind of housing that we're talking about supplying, because you might be able to find a $500 RV, but you can also find a $500,000 RV. And there are RV parks. I think there's one being built on the south side of Bend right now that's not going to necessarily be affordable, and they'll have huge rigs in there, and that has nothing whatsoever to do with workforce or affordable housing or anything like that. So again, it'll, the details matter.
Believe that this the tenancy of legislation provided the opportunity to cap the rent that would be charged. Which, I mean, that's complicated.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, I also. I feel like you got a house, you got a parking area and a driveway. It's not such a terrible thing for you to be able to offer somebody with a really expensive RV, a place to
Still frees up a spot somewhere else.
That's a good point.
Yeah, but
Fair enough.
But I mean, that is a piece that literally was a specific consideration in the legislation. I turned it on its head and I asked, is there a way that you can not require someone to pay anything, right? If someone just wants to host someone, and we were researching that.
Yeah, we're going down that path. If I had to take a quick gun check, yes, I would think that there's a requirement that there is a rental agreement. I don't know if it may be one of those things where you could have a rental agreement where your rent is agreed to be zero. it probably is one of those things that it has to be $1. There's so many things that, have to have some monetary value associated with it. It wouldn't surprise me if this was one of them.
Utility bill or something too.
Yeah.
There's always some cost.
My mind just always goes to, we stopped out at our tour recently at the Stevens Ranch properties out there. And I asked of the city, the planner, Damian Cernick, a lot of this was packaged as housing for, a lot of excitement as housing for public sector workers, teachers, and so forth, that it might be out there. What kind of assurances are there? And how do you implement that? And it was kind of crickets. That's not a criticism of Damien, but it's difficult to implement those kinds of, and it just kind of slides into, it's only market rate housing in terms of bin market, which is ridiculous for a lot of people.
Well, I mean, it wasn't crickets, just to be fair to him. I mean, it was like, hey, the cost is determined by the type of housing that we're building. So we're building these houses that, despite the bin market being ridiculous, I agree, it's going to be less ridiculous than, 3,000 square foot home, on the west side of Bend. So I mean, I know what you're saying, but I found that to be like a fair answer.
Sure. And I tried to say that respectfully to Damien, but
It's not like he said nothing.
that's right. You're right.
Well, yeah, he did say that it was based on the design features to attract buyers or renters or whatever that were less likely to pay lots of money. So they were building less expensive units that aren't going to attract the higher end market.
And more power to them. But I mean, we all know there are 1,200 square foot homes in new phases of Northwest Crossing that are $800,000 and $900,000. So
Yep.
yeah.
It's still going to be expensive. Yeah.
But we've also, for example, we see building, modest homes that look nice and, on quality, but are, they are, they're not.
His sister's ones are now at 6.
I mean, but they're they're some of the lowest, in specific developments they are offering. They are offering what, the only missing middle housing.
I get all that. I get all that. It's just when something is when there's a lot of excitement because it's housing for teachers. I just want to know, well, how are you going to do that? Is it really? Are we really going to have educators in there? And I don't know how you implement it. It's hard.
Jackie is actually working on that in Prineville, and she's working on that in Sisters. She got some special arrangement with Woodlands to do a couple of homes there. So hopefully that's going to go forward. But she is actually trying to serve the people that you're talking about.
Great.
And that's what's been so great about Rooted Homes.
Mhm.
Because they really do reach out, and they've really, they've moved out from Bend. Now they're they've got a big project going on in the Pine, Redmond. It's really great.
School board will figure out how to legally structure it.
Cool. Good.
Let them bird dog it.
Yep.
I have a question with that. And is there room in the code for what I'm thinking about, like seasonal workers, like cluster of RVs? Where seasonal workers, where it wouldn't be necessarily year round, but it might be a temporary solution for folks that are only here for a few months of the year.
So this legislation is specific to one RV per residential property. So this wouldn't be the solution to that. I know I'm not as familiar with this. I've seen parts of the state statute. There certainly is worker housing that's allowed. And there's a huge amount of rules that go associated with it. When you read it, it's like, oh, you read Grapes of Wrath. There's like some things we want to avoid with worker housing. But so there are allowances for that, but we don't have it. We haven't set that up locally, and I don't know the history of that or specifically why that's set up in some places and not here. But
They have more migratory agricultural labor.
yeah, I think.
Like Hood River in Wasco County.
Yeah, I know that there are long sections of statute that pertain to that.
I mean, it's not like an RV or a van, a group van site, but I mean, the whole idea behind that, workforce housing project in Tom River was, for seasonal workers.
So working our way back up a little bit here. So wildfire mapping is another topic that the Board of Commissioners, we sat down in the official meeting last Thursday with Department of Forestry and leadership from the state. The map was, a version of the map was presented to us, just kind of the working version of the map. Some, kind of head scratching moments like, well, that, you had your story, you drive right down the road, you're like,
It's irrigated on both sides of the highway, and then when it's done being irrigated for, haying or whatever, then they usually run their cows on it, so then how tall is it, when you've done that, and that was all high danger. And I'm going,
High hazard.
well, it's definitely a problem. So anyway, they were saying that they had wanted to remove those problems from that, and definitely missed it in Deschutes County because it's on Highway 20 also, where all the elk are that we got to see last night.
To unpack that a little more, the hazard rating, low, moderate, or high is based on two things. Probability of fire, and that's based on fire history. Probability that this pixel on the map is going to have an ignition. Probability and intensity based on topography, vegetation, etc. So there are areas that the fire might not burn very hot because of the vegetation, but where the probability of ignition is so high, just based on history, that it would still get classified as high risk. Commissioner Dare's got the maps up.
So
Well, I brought
I
them
was, I was, I'm familiar with the Sisters area intimately, given the fact that I've been fighting fire on west of town for over 30 years. And I find it interesting that a lot of the areas in and around Sisters and west of Sisters are listed as moderate risk, even though there have been so many fires and so often it burns. And Colgate is listed as moderate. It gets evacuated every time there's a fire in the community. Blackview is moderate. It has had 2 houses burned. Colgate's had at least a half a dozen burn over the history. That area burns every few years. We're the host of a big fire. I mean, Millie was one of the more recent ones. We've had Cash, Millie, B&B. I mean,
Bull Creek.
dozens of fires. Most of that is listed as moderate. My irrigated hayfield is high.
And we even had a fire then, remember, August 13th, when the tanker blew up, and they're still digging out the dirt now.
So,
But yeah, it didn't
After
hurt
digging
anything.
into it with the modeling folks, so we got
Sure.
to have at the modelers for a couple of hours down in K Falls, and the best explanation we come up with is that there's basically 4 variables that go in. Then those two things, those 2 outputs, intensity and probability, that come out. And it seems like the reason, in that specific area, west side of Sisters, they're coming up with moderate ratings is because the Forest Service is able to provide them with pretty large scale spatial data set of all the fuels reduction treatments that have been done. So their fuel layer that they have in this model, it's like, okay, you've done a lot of work in the national forest around Sisters. So that's how they're spitting this out. But yeah, it didn't make any sense to me either. And when we talked about it with the Sister City Council yesterday, at least a couple of the counselors were saying, yeah, if they classified, East Sisters as high hazard and West Sisters as moderate hazard. So they were saying that they were going to go to the modeling team and ask the whole city. And well,
the reality is that we've had almost no fires east of Sisters and all the fires. And maybe they're arguing that they burned them all off and it's no longer a high risk. And you know how fuels regrow and reburn.
well, when you had no fires east of Sisters, and what are you doing over at the Cloverdale Fire District? You guys do something, right?
They
Accidents,
take care of
tanker
sick
fire
people.
once in a while. We get
tanker fire.
These are ignitions, right? So
Well, they even set up a whole center,
Mostly-
right behind me, that's high danger. They have 2 million-gallon ponds and they used it for staging for a fire, maybe in 13 or 12, right behind me. And that's all dangerous. And it's a hay ranch. So I just found it fascinating, but like the Lake County Commissioners were incredibly upset. They felt like they really missed what their topography, what really is happening in Lake County. So they spent decades trying to get a fish off the map that they said we're not at the ocean here. So, it's when you're dealing with institutions.
Like Commissioner Barry Schulenberger, when I was talking with him afterwards, he said they underestimated. Yeah, that was his concern, was that he actually, with those variables, he thought that more of Lake County should have been rated as high risk. And which doesn't matter to them because it's only the properties that get regulated are both high risk and WUI. And they basically don't have any WUI in Lake County. So
It all boils down to the R327 building standards, which is, fire hardened construction. My wife and I put a new house on our property 5 years ago, and I think it already fits those standards. So my point of view is it's really not a big lift. I don't know if cement siding is specifically required, but fireproof siding, windows, roofing, even the most or probably all shingles that are out there are fire rated, because we had that discussion when we were putting the house. So we put a metal roof on and the builder said, no, those things look terrible. And this is all fire rated anyways. And then so it's really about decks, open under deck space, and blocks and venting. And it's just simple design stuff. So R327, I don't think, somebody needs to correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think it's like a big lift for the way you would generally build a new structure on a property now.
Yeah, because our house was built in 2005 and we already had a lot of those features. And being the experience where I had a fire go around my house in Southern California, the house that burned down in the neighborhood down the hill was actually a brand new house, but the venting, I always tell people this is the simplest thing to do.
Stuff.
Have really teeny venting
Yeah.
on your house because the venting sucked it in, and please don't ever use chips because those things can ignite and blow for like 2 miles. And that's really what, my hay burned up at my place, the straw from the school fundraiser. Burned up before the fire got there because, an ember flew over the top of the mountain and started that.
So R327 and then defensible space. So that's where it gets implemented. The fire district, state fire marshal, however it's going to evolve. People will be looking for defensible space requirements, defensible space actions, truly that, 0 to 5, and then trimming up trees and opening up your property. So that's where it's tangible for us, because we could debate the map all day long. Deschutes County proper, we did kind of the wildfire hazard mapping exercise a couple years ago. And after a long debate, I was sitting up here and I supported the fact that on any hot wind-driven event in September, pretty much anything anywhere could be burning. And we just saw that in Lahaina too, right? It was 60-mile-an-hour winds coming down the slopes, totally didn't expect it, and the whole thing was gone. So we can debate what's low, medium, or high all day long.
But or
Yeah.
September 7th of 2020, when we had,
Yeah,
the fire
right down the mountain.
Go over the mountain.
Yeah.
They know the wind science is incredibly exacting, and because the Green Ridge fire was put out on Tuesday of that week, and the fire Warm Springs, it ignited on Saturday. And I was thinking like, oh my God, they're going to run from the Green Ridge and actually get that one out. No, they didn't. It blew up Saturday. And then when the winds came on Monday, it was, it just went over.
There's some background behind that.
Yeah,
The one was on the reservation and they don't fight those fires very much. I was on the Green Ridge. ODF fights fire at night. Feds don't. We caught our.
You did a great job.
ODF was the one managing that fire. Well, they did the night shift. We caught it during the night and kept it and held it. The one we've been watching, the other one punking around for 2 weeks, and they never really put any resources on it. And when the winds were forecast a week out.
I know, and they know
And
that.
that's how they fight fire over there. It's
Well,
just-
look what it did to Detroit though. Absolutely. sad.
Well, so, and we have, family property, Northern Klamath, and, my brother-in-law has this little cabin out there, and, he had it cleaned up meticulously. Sure enough, there was a fire that went right around it. So, I mean, it can happen. A wooden structure with some wooden, chips around the walkway, not at the edge of but so there was little ember pots in the chips, but the whole thing was survived and it went right around it. So, I mean, defensible space does work too.
No, we had 359 homes burned in the fire that went around our house, and 3 people died.
Yeah.
I mean, and that was, wind driven 80 miles an hour. But that's, the Santa Monica, that's the winds in Southern California. So it's, when you have a wind issue, that's when you just, it's really, if you're elected.
Well, in Lahaina, it really was like 60-mile-an-hour winds. I mean, the shingles were blown off with the roofs that didn't burn. So that was interesting to see.
It becomes a blowtorch.
Yeah,
You can't
yeah,
stop it.
Yeah.
No, you can't.
Just get out of the way.
So as I say, those,
Aspects of this mapping.
Yep.
This mapping process that are important for people to understand are, number one, the properties that are mapped, wildland urban interface and high risk are going to be places where the state is targeting technical and financial assistance in coming years. And then number two, there's been all these questions about and speculation about insurance. And in the patch legislation that the legislature just passed, they specifically legally prohibited insurers from using this data, this map layer, to withdraw coverage, increase premiums, etc. Number two, they required insurers, to recognize defensible space and wildfire hardening work that's done on properties in rate calculation and give people a discount. It may not be a very big discount, but so it's actually they required the opposite. And so during the presentation that we got down in K Falls, the state insurance commissioner went through with us in detail how even though a whole bunch of people had claimed that their insurance was increased because of these draft maps last year, they investigated it and there was not a single case where that was actually true. And the reason for that is because the insurers have better models of their own that are populated with a whole bunch of claim and loss data, like real claim and loss data for our community. That's very spatially specific. So, this insurance commissioner guy, basically, he showed us like some time series bar chart of what kind of claims and losses the insurance industry had paid out on wildfire in the last few decades, and this huge bar in 2020 Labor Day fires. And he said, "This is why insurers are jacking up premiums all over the state of Oregon right now." So
I was actually told that somebody in 16 had a problem insuring their home in the city of Bend. And they had to go through the Farm Bureau to get some kind of insurance there. They just happened to know somebody, but they were and this was in 2016. And so I thought that was really.
The State Farm has been dropping a lot of people in the last couple of years, and Country Financial, which is actively picking those up because they consider them to be better risks.
Well, the interesting thing, this Oregon Fair Plan, I think he was telling us that they raised the limits to 600,000 if you have to get that insurance. But it's a bare bones policy. So you really, hopefully there's going to be somebody out there. There's 130 different providers at this time.
So I have a question that no one may know the answer to, but you never know. So if you own a piece of property that has forest on it, like it's an F1 or F2 piece of property, and it burns, and let's say you don't even have a structure on it, or maybe do, and your insurance covers the structure, but is there any way to pay for the trees that you lost?
Depends on whether you had them insured.
Who insures trees on
for timber owners insure their forests?
So there's like an insurance for timber owners essentially, and that's like pretty common.
I don't know how common, but I know
Yes.
it's a bunch of them do it.
Yeah, and
I don't know whether small woodlot owners are
Like how big of a
getting
farm you
that,
have to
and,
be,
you
yeah.
know, Your wire housers and, you know, your.
Yeah.
Those kind of folks, industrial timber landowners, they have insurance, but
Right.
I don't actually know how
Yeah.
small they go.
Yeah,
But that's
just
that'd be a
interested.
place to start.
Okay, thanks.
I think I got paid for my orange tree that burned up, but I only
Really?
lost one tree. I mean, it was really
I
amazing.
mean, that's.
That could have
cool.
been a lot of oranges over time though.
Oh, now-
That's right. Yeah.
Where is that tree? I need it.
So working our way back up here, Tumalo Community Plan. So is this for the unincorporated community of Tumalo, kind of that mapped area that's the original plat of the area? So
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, this is one of our regional plans, as I mentioned. And, you know, of course, as we've seen in other regional plans, there's a lot of people who Tumalo is their hometown. You know, they see themselves as Tumaloans and, you know, are very invested in that community. And, you know, that's the place they go to get a latte and they like it the way it is. And there's, you know, people in the community who like it the way there is. There's people who would love to see more opportunity there, you know, more restaurants, more housing opportunities. So real, you know, it's been a very interesting public engagement, lots of different opinions, lots of strong opinions. I think overwhelmingly, you know, what we're hearing is from that engagement that people like it the way it is, and they're not looking for it to become a posh outpost of Bend or to grow rapidly. And of course, the big topic is sewer there. You know, that's been before the board a number of times. And, you know, those unincorporated communities by default allow multifamily housing, you know, so apartment complexes. And that has been precluded in Tumalo because of the septic situation. You know, the soils won't handle that level of, or the drain fields required to handle that are so large that it's not economic. You know, at such time that sewer comes one way or another, I think a lot of the community is concerned that you'll see, you know, multifamily housing, you'll see much denser housing that's allowed in the urban communities. And it's a real concern about the changes in the feel and the layout of the community.
Question about our process this evening. So these two items, this one and the transportation system plan, we're going to be deliberating about officially pretty soon. So can we really say, can us planning commissioners really say anything about that tonight, since this isn't,
Oh, that's a good point.
we're not really deliberating?
To avoid deliberation.
We can't start arguing, you guys. Save your arguments for later. So we probably should share what we think.
that was good characterization of that topic.
Yes.
So
Okay.
I think you guys can, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna-
Based on what Will just said, I'm curious, so. Multi-family housing is an authorized. land
Conditional use.
In one of these unincorporated communities, but, is there any dimensions set on that? Like, we're talking like 5-story apartment building, or is, you know, like, you can do a duplex, or, I mean, do we have any thresholds?
I think the strongest constraints are going to be the 30-foot height limit, as well as the need to provide off-street parking for whatever is built. So that combination, I think, would functionally limit the density, but even that was of some concern to the community. You could imagine, you know, those types of things where you've got the whole first floor, you know, as a raised parking garage, and then you've got, you know, another, you know, 2 stories of apartments on top of that. I don't know how that pencils out of the economies of it, but there's definitely some concern about the rural flavor of the community. I mean, certainly one of the things that comes up is, you know, those, I've heard them called the ship houses near Newport Market, where it's, you know, those tall, narrow condos all right next to each other. You know, with sewer, that might be something that at least I think you would see some development interest for in Tumalo. And I think that at least some of the locals wouldn't find entirely a welcome change to the development pattern.
So one thing that came up, and this is just a review of what came up at the meeting rather than me adding any additional information, but one thing that came up at our meeting was we had asked the staff for some ideas of like what are some of the things that the planning commission could consider. And I think, Will, you had said that one possibility is we could consider recommending some sort of restriction on that. Like, okay, like right now it's permissible, but I suppose that would be up to you guys if you want it to continue to be permissible or not.
And
So,
this process. Something's recommended in the Tumalo community plan, then we turn that into code.
Is
Yeah,
that-
exactly. So we would come back to you in your next annual work plan update and say, hey, among the things that you did last year is you indicated an aspiration to make some changes to the code in Tumalo. Where do you want to set that among long-range planning's priorities? So it doesn't happen automatically. You would have to pick it among a suite of things that you're hoping to get done that year.
So we've supported a kind of a sewer feasibility study financially at the board level. Just recently, I think it was $75,000 was another amount of money we put in for the community efforts for the discussion of sewer. So we're not saying yes or no, but by investing, kind of doing some analysis and engineering research on it, it would solve some of these failing septic system future issues that would be the driver that I'm at for supporting that. So as I say, we don't need to debate anything, but we're kind of in that spot. Last year, we were at National Finals Rodeo in FR, my wife and I, and Jim and Jessica Crouch were down there with a little thing at Cowboy Christmas, a display. So we got a photo with them, and my wife puts it on the internet, on Facebook. Somebody sent an email quickly to the county, saying that I should be a conflict of interest talking about anything in Tumalo because I know Jim and Jessica. I was like, oh, interesting. So I just say that it can get real hot real quick on some of these topics. So, but as I say, I mean, I live in a full disclosure world here, and we want to make sure people get their voices heard, which is exactly what we're doing here tonight.
Rumor and mistrust can run. We did have a couple of hearings.
Yep.
On the first one, we had half a dozen people show up to complain about the fact that nobody knew about it. And so we said, okay, guys, we'll hold the hearing over, fill the room. We got a few more people showed up.
Yeah, there's passion.
I mean, we did
But-
eventually get people talking. Like at first, people were actually a little hesitant to share. If I recall, like it was like we had some people here, and they wanted to be here, but they didn't really want to share too much about what they thought. But people did warm up to the process, and we did actually get some good ideas. And I actually felt like the discussion ended up going fairly well because we had that sort of when we were trying to figure out from the staff, like, hey, what are our options here? And then I think people kind of started to understand a little bit more like what we can do and not do, or like not, or what we can recommend that you all do versus not do. And I think that helped people feel a little bit more comfortable with, like, they're trying to tell us, like, we don't want our community to change. And they know that sewer is a part of that. And I think we started to help them understand that, like, while we may not be able to do anything about that, here's some other things that we could do that may help you get what you want in terms of not having this turn into like a posh suburb of Bend or something like it. But the point is their desires are clear, but they don't have the technical knowledge to know to walk in here and say, like, hey, here's 3 things you can change about your code to make sure our community doesn't turn into like, so it worked out okay, but it did take a little bit of like.
The chair did a great job. Okay,
Thanks,
you haven't
Matt.
talked yet.
Yeah,
Oh,
get up here and say something. You're in the room, you got to say something.
Pretty much.
Good.
That's pretty
Good
much.
job.
We're done. Pretty much everybody
Yep,
was drugged to the front and said, okay, you're here. Tell us what you want.
good job.
Public engagement.
Yep. Well, if you got to the meeting,
And we
Yeah.
did. I mean, pretty much what we had was 10,000 foot level comments.
Yeah.
And finally.
and a lot of energy. So you're like, well, how do we work
It was
through
back
this?
to, okay, people. Here's the plan, here's the code, take it home, read it line for line. Give us specifics on what you want. We're here to help you. Tell us what you want,
Good.
please.
Great.
And that was, we were basically begging them to give us something to work with.
Well, they didn't necessarily know, but I think it was when you started like giving us like, here's some things. And then I could just see the sort of room kind of relax, like, oh, wait, maybe there is a thing, or maybe they are trying to help us instead of us just going,
Uh-huh.
just kind of like, okay, we hear you, but like, not really like.
And I think there's some distress in Tumalo because it felt like overnight that small subdivision with the private sewer went in.
Yeah.
Without people understanding that process or even aware that that is a possibility. So I think that's where a lot of the root of the, distress is this. It could happen overnight again, or it could be worse, or it could be, and so this fear is legit because
Yeah.
in a very small scale it happened.
Mhm.
And so I think that
Well,
that's.
and the reality is it's legit.
Yeah.
I mean,
Mhm.
the sewer, if they put a sewer in Tumalo, it could have a significant impact.
It
on the
will
feel of that
have a
community.
Mhm.
I mean, quite frankly, when sewer came to Sisters, I don't have a vote in Sisters, but I didn't support it because of what it would have done, what it did to the community. Because I didn't want Sisters to change that much.
I mean, because it was 500 for like thousands of decades. and it went up to
But when you're
3,200.
on septic. You can't have massive apartment buildings and you can't have huge subdivisions and you can't have high density infill, which is happening now. Because now we've got a sewer, now you can stack them deep. And put them in tight, whereas before you had a rural community.
So then we have that catch-22 down by the river in Tumalo because the failing system is possibly not going to get reauthorized. I mean, we have end of line on some of
Keeps the
those.
fish fed.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So, well, so let's acknowledge that, the roundabout, we drove to Sisters well, you're doing it every day, but I drove. So all summer long, every time we went, it was like, you didn't know which way you were going to go because the cones went different ways. Last night was the first time I'm like, oh, here we go, all the roundabouts. And it was, there's still construction, but they're all done. Functioning, they're all functioning now. Yeah.
Last week, the roundabout in Tumalo, the car in front of me pulled up and turned left
Ooh,
instead of going round.
yeah.
Oops.
And tonight, the car behind me, kind of the one, just last one in line. Stopped behind me, waiting for traffic to clear, coming in the other direction.
Yeah,
They were
not even gonna
across.
get in.
Instead of just going around,
Yeah.
they were parked there, blocking all the cars behind them, waiting for it to clear on the other lane.
Well, so that roundabout
Really fun.
and then the
It's
bike
really
underpass
practical.
is done, I don't know if it's open, but it's being built.
Really? Well, yeah, she was going, well, it was like a month and a half ago, I think. She was going and she was like getting really upset, so she.
The roundabout.
She did a U-turn, somebody hit her with the pickup and she died. That was, I think, Friday afternoon.
Instead of going all the way around, she was trying to cut
Yeah,
back.
she just went, oh, I'm like, I can't handle this, so she flipped to you and got.
Oh, God.
Yeah. I was,
It's really sad.
I know, patience is a virtue.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for the fact you're not supposed to be using your phones while you're driving, you need a QR code that you can click on 2 miles ahead of
Well-
the roundabout that gives instructions on how to use it.
Yeah. Read this report. Well, I was looking for something positive. That got pretty negative here. So speaking of that one roundabout, so we'll go back up to transportation system plan update. So that is coming through the system too. When I think of that, that's basically the output of that is the spreadsheet for capital improvement for the next 10 or 20 years, right? What are the priorities, whether the community investments, how much money we're going to have and how we're going to schedule those dollars out? Because obviously the maintenance is always a priority, but safety improvements and capacity additions to the system is kind of the big output there. So, any other thoughts or?
So is there anything we can talk about?
Well,
That one's coming to you on a hearing, so you gotta be careful now.
So yeah, put it in context then. So I mean, the planning commission, here's the TSP. The TSP has a spreadsheet of projects. Can projects be moved around? What kind of authority is happening here from the planning commission and then the board?
So I mean, there's goals and policies that come
Yep.
out of that. There's a rankings of goals and policies. So some projects are ranked high, medium, low for priority, and there's members of the community that want to see different ones of those. I think I can characterize the process to date that something that, with all the money and all the effort that's flowing through there's been a lot of interest in rural trails.
On both sides.
On both sides. So that's something that, you would think normally as, a 1% issue in these plans. And it's taken up a lot of the discussion in the room. So I think both deliberative bodies will be talking about kind of the roles of trails in our community and how that transportation plan encourages or discourages those opportunities.
Is it like 1 or 2 hotspots?
Or is it all across the county?
I think there's two places. So there's two, I can characterize the process to date. There's been a general interest in seeing a connection between, but from some angles, from seeing a connection between Sisters and Black Butte. And, that was attempted previously, was unpopular, continues to be unpopular, with the communities, particularly they're adjacent to it for those reasons. Even this time, some people in Black Butte have some skepticism about, facilitating access to their resort community. The other one where we see this discussion is going south towards Lava Butte. There's some forestry resource zones, and owners of those properties have been concerned, bringing, kind of recreators into, adjacent to industrial forest is something that might not be, a suitable, compatible use to have right next to each other. And there's some, some case law. There's actually a case moving its way through community development where ODOT's trying to improve one of those trails. And there's some really unclear state statute about how that's to be approached. So
If I understand it, there was some reference to agricultural trails in the valley being actually Luber or Cornfields or somebody threw out the whole concept of trails simply because of the proximity of the agricultural practices and the fact that it would have had a negative impact on farm practices, spraying, etc. Near public trails.
yeah, there was an important Luba case in that regard. It'll be interesting to see how it kind of plays into the current application, but yeah, it's not, I don't think it's an entirely settled matter, but the concern's reasonable, which is, if you put these trails next to, what the state sees as resource extraction sites, commercial forests, commercial farms, that those uses can be incompatible for just the reasons you cited.
I mean, there was a lot of information entered into the record discussing impacts on wildlife. It's going to be an interesting discussion in a couple of weeks with what's in the record.
Yes.
Perfect.
Well
said.
A
No,
relative.
that was
That's about
perfect.
as
That
far
was
as I-
perfect.
it's not like-
Good job. Good job.
Right up
Yeah. There's the line.
right here.
Yeah, nice. Good job.
It's interesting that, the meat of the plan has to date been uncontroversial. And so this, has historically been a relatively minor issue. Seems to be what's going to be most discussed at the hearings.
So then working our way back up plan. So as I say, these are all getting to be mature for discussion, deliberation. Tonight is really about a little bit of hearing each other speak and share information, get a feel for, what we think's going on out there, what kind of work plan, as you mentioned.
I have a question for you guys. So we have been, in the last couple of years, we've sort of shifted from giving sort of like how our group decides what to recommend. We, in the past, have had like a motion, sort of like, hey, we recommend this plan, as written, or we recommend this amendment with these following changes or something like that. And then we vote on it, and then you find out if it was unanimous or whatever. And then more recently, with these more complex issues that we've been working on, we've actually had the staff making us kind of like a decision matrix. So like, for instance, with the mule deer thing, it was like, hey, do you think we should even be doing anything here, first of all? And then we would discuss that and vote, someone make a motion, yes or no. And then if yes, then we would move on to the second thing. So what you guys ended up getting was sort of like a sort of 3-part recommendation. Like they thought this generally, and then they thought this more specifically, and then they thought this especially, specifically. And I think we have something similar intended for these next 3 things: the comprehensive plan update, the Tomoa community plan, and the transportation system plan. So I think I'm interested in some feedback from the 3 of you guys on when you receive a recommendation from us. And we have some options here about exactly how we're recommending whatever we're recommending, and we want it to be the most useful package of information. So like, let's say like, maybe you disagree with us generally, but there's some elements in there that you can still make use of when you go to make your decision.
Well, I think all these are larger plans, right? They're not one topic items. They're all big plans. So when I'm receiving these things, we're getting a memo like this kind of already distilled from what happened here. There are times when I would love to go back and say, oh, I want to hear how that went. We don't have time to do that sometimes. But these are all going to break down into little pieces and, so any recommendation detail is going to be very valuable right now. Because, I mean, in the end, I want a comprehensive plan and we're just going to debate the little pieces, some of the topics, some stuff won't even be controversial.
So like a good recommendation might be something like, the planning commission recommended the plan. As a whole, there was a majority support of the plan as written right now. However, there
These are
was,
the topics that,
here's
Yeah.
the 10 topics, and
Yeah.
then there was quite a split on this one. Wow, they really, versus this one, they really unanimously agreed, and this one they unanimously agreed, and this one there was a split, that kind of
that's
thing.
what I think, yeah, so. Thoughts?
What do you guys like in terms of detail, or is it better if the staff gives sort of a summary of the discussion in general, or both?
Or do you want a minority report?
Matt will give that to you.
I was actually going to say that I tremendously value and appreciate the recommendations and the way that they're packaged that we've been receiving. There have been some instances recently when the Board of Commissioners has decided, in pretty significant contrast to the recommendations that we've received. And in some cases, I think my fellow commissioners have been, they are thinking about concerns, factors, information that has been shared with them that they don't necessarily feel is represented in the recommendations that they're receiving. So if that's going to happen, we might as well make it explicit and allow, ask the planning commission to send us, here's our recommendation. There is a minority opinion. And here's all the logic and kind of the fact finding behind that. So that I think that having that be explicitly laid out, that minority opinion would lead to better decision making. I mean, it may not change the decisions, but
Yeah.
the decision process will be much more transparent.
That's actually a really good suggestion, because I think anyone who's attending your meeting and didn't attend our meeting might really benefit from hearing, okay, like now we can see why these commissioners voted this way, instead of just sort of being confused, like, oh, the Board of County Commissioners went against the Planning Commission, and people are left going, well, why? I think maybe people will feel better if they're like, okay, well, there's really like two legitimate sort of sets of opinions and arguments, and maybe the Planning Commission as a whole the majority ended up recommending this, but maybe the board went against it because actually there's this other set of viewpoints out there that maybe our community's best understanding that these are really nuanced issues. They're not just obviously all one way or the other.
We get such an incredibly detailed matrix. It's usually like 8 pages or something. Usually it's so you can read it, and we go through it by line, but having the minority opinion, I think is good. The more details we can get from your group, I think it's important, because you never know what you're going to really feel is important, and both sides of the issue usually are, have some merit. So
Yeah.
I would say as much information as we can get, it's better.
Okay.
But, our detail is huge, and they will say on our matrix a lot of times, well, the planning commission voted, 4-3 or whatever on this issue. So
Yeah.
your information is captured and put in our matrix. And I think that's good.
And, for me, I often, I really appreciate the recommendations of the planning commission, and I often, feel pretty good about the line of argument that flows through that. But if I could see in advance what the other line of argument was, it would actually, when we're up on the dais deliberating, it would set me up better to debate.
Oh, that makes sense.
debate
Yeah.
Issues.
Yeah, so here's
Instead of being
surprise. The reasons why that there was a 5-2, what
Yeah.
the two, what are the two thinking as opposed to.
Right, because, yeah. So, well, question then for you or for Tanya too. So here's the thing, we're making these motions that are relatively brief. So a motion would be like, oh, we recommend the comprehensive plan as it is. But if we're trying to, it's gonna be a little tricky to make a motion that's like, okay, so I want to amend this motion to include everything Matt said, like, so we're recommending that we not have trails or whatever. Or we're recommending that we do have trails, but also we want the board to know that some people don't want trails because of these reasons.
So the way to do that, I think, would be that there was, the opposition because of X, Y, Z, these points. And then as
Yeah.
Commissioner Chang has said, when he's up there looking at it, he can argue, maybe it gives him the background to argue against whatever or for whatever the minority report.
I guess what my
I
question,
feel like that's already in there. I mean,
But it doesn't explain.
that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Doesn't explain the no vote.
So let me go ahead and finish my question and then,
Oh, sorry.
yeah, so the question is, sorry, it's a long-winded question. So the question is, are you guys as staff already summarizing the minority opinion in some easy to digest bullet points for the board to read through? Or is that something we need to, if we want to, as a commission, make this part of our official recommendation to the board that they, whatever we want, but please also consider what the minority opinion was. How do we do that? How do we
The way
communicate
that
that?
we're doing that now is that we're, as we come forward to the board, so I'd be sitting someplace about this far away from the dais and saying, hey, there was a planning commission hearing on this date. Planning commission voted X to Y to recommend approval of this. There was some, that this was unanimous or there was some significant difference of opinion. That difference of opinion rested around these issues, that people were concerned with this or that, the minority were concerned with that. And so generally I'll try to carry forward the story of what happened. But it could be helpful to, maybe I'm thinking out loud here is that maybe after a formal vote, you say, okay, we as a whole, recommend the board take this. There might be a moment where you as the chair say, are there any sort of comments that, that planning commission members want to have, and we'll take notes. We're good at that. And we can carry those forward. So then if the board says, hey, tell us more about, this opinion, what was said about that, what was important to them, that we, that's going to rest in our heads and in our notes and in our memos, and we can carry that forward about, particularly, I think, some of these, sometimes, there's a pretty significant community input. So it's clear that, not only just planning commission members, but a significant part of the community felt a particular way. And if that part of the community ends up being losing the vote by one person in the PC, and the recommendation is, yeah, do this, then, we lose a lot of that citizen input we work so hard to get. So I think that, in particular, when voices that from the community are channeled through the PC and represent a lot of, diverse opinions, I mean, the board's certainly going to hear it at their hearing as well, but it's good to be warmed up for that discussion. So that's what we're trying to do, and we could do more of it.
Memo, because Commissioner Chang is saying, like, it would be nice to have a heads up and be able to think about it ahead of time and be prepared. So can we maybe have those comments carried forward into the memo specifically, not just if they happen to ask?
Yeah, I think that, yes, we can do that, and we'll have to balance it. Of course, our risk is always that we write too much and we lose our commissioner's attention. So, we're trying to balance the length of the memo.
Yeah.
Half the
But if
memo,
it-
yeah,
but-
That does a really
No,
amazing
it's
job
good,
of
yeah.
packing a lot of information into a very short memo. But yeah, a little bit of context or flavor.
Okay.
On both, I mean, and that goes for the recommendation or the majority
Mhm.
opinion too. I mean, a little bit more flavor could potentially be.
And also, if a commissioner is looking for that information, I mean, you don't have to read the information if you don't want to, but if somebody wants to go through and just flip through and find the information, then at least it's there. And Nick wants to say
I was
something.
gonna say, it's a little bit of new territory in how you're gonna capture this. It's not completely foreign.
Mhm.
But one of the things you might want to do just on the largest projects, because there's a lot that goes to the board, is you might want to revisit your memo with the planning commission just before you send it to the board, because you're not on the clock, just to say, did we accurately capture the reasons for and against, whatever the case may be, and you can, it's like, you got 4 of my 5 points, but you missed this one because, staff, you're writing things down, you're capturing, you're listening to the discussion. And just to, make some of the biggest ones, just maybe check back in with the planning commission before you take it to the board, so they're really comfortable with how you captured it. That's just.
I think that's a really reasonable way to couch it. I would not disagree at all with some mechanism of capturing, whether it's formalized or we continue with kind of an informal, relying on staff to capture minority input, minority viewpoints. The caution would be that that we don't send on to the board. Here was our suggestion. This is how the majority voted. Here's the dissent, and it's about this and this and this and this and this.
We don't tell them what the 4 was about. Yeah.
We really distort. We really distort.
The majority opinion or the recommendation should have as much flavor.
Yeah.
That's
Well, actually, it should have more because it's the majority. But yeah, but yeah, it's a danger. Yeah, it's the danger you run into. And also just I would also add that there's the potential to reinforce both sidism. Sometimes I think my colleagues as well may be torn how to vote, and when it comes down to it. And it's a matter of, it just doesn't quite get to that level of support. I'm not strongly dissenting. It's just not quite there. So not opposed to the idea. I think Nick's idea is a reasonable one. I think staff does a pretty good job from what I can tell of representing when there's some dissent. I've asked, and my colleagues on the planning commission have been supportive that staff, to the extent they have the capacity to, this is a related topic, but if they can close the loop and bring back to the planning commission, once it goes up to the bosses that make decisions, if we can hear back whether they decide to accept our suggestion or go against it, if we can hear back a little bit on that, particularly high profile items, get a lot of community input.
usually it's on the headline news the next.
That's right. So we get that too.
Yeah.
But that's useful, and
Watch the video also.
we can.
It is nice having those snippets.
It's nice to have that to close the loop. And then I would say lastly, the inverse of that is also true. And that's what we're talking about, that when staff carries forward planning commission recommendations to the board, to the extent that the board has time for it and is interested in it, the context and the full context, I would hope would be useful. So that two-way kind of thing, and staff, we're really leaning on staff for that. And I think you guys are great at it.
They love
They do a great job. Bring us the feedback.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's my idea. So you all take a vote when you're looking at a recommendation. There's a majority and there's a minority. For every person, you get to go back through the record, through the public comments, and pick a quote.
Oh, nice. I love that.
You pick one quote.
Oh, I love that.
And if it's 4-3, there'll be 4
Yeah.
votes that
Yeah.
support the recommendation. There'll be 3 votes that are against it.
I really just like that idea.
That's good, because what I struggle with is there's a difference between reading the staff memo, which is 3-4 pages, and reading the entire record.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if there was some kind of intermediate.
I mean, do you guys want to do this? Because the planning commissioners, because I think it's a really fun idea. And I go back through the public testimony, I write down things people say, and of course, it's not exact. Because I'm shorthanding, but I kind of go back through and kind of go, I really like this, what this person said. I mean, what's the general feeling from my commissioners? Do you guys want to try doing something like that?
I'm new to this, right? And so I'm still figuring out like the processes, but my like best thoughts seem to happen like on my drive home after the meeting.
Oh,
Right
yeah.
after the meeting.
Right after we voted, yeah.
I'm like, she said this and that happened.
Yeah,
And I feel like I get, and I hopefully this will wear off, but I get a little stage fright up there. And then, but my thoughts are just crazy on the way home. And I go home, I tell my husband all these things.
And he listens.
Oh, wow, dog. As he's going to sleep and you're talking.
Well, I don't even, yeah. But like having maybe, and I know we don't want to make it lengthy, but like sometimes what you're saying is like having just like a couple sentences or of thoughts, maybe. I mean,
how about this? Just because in case people don't remember an exact quote from the public testimony, maybe I like the idea of after we make our recommendation, our official motion is passed, everything's done, then we just kind of go down the line and say one short comment about, why you voted the way you did. And then,
Your range of like, I strongly.
yeah, and
I strongly feel this, or, hey, I was really torn on this
Yeah.
because of.
but then maybe you guys go down and then you just have 7 bullet points, like for 7 commissioners, like, I don't know, you can even put their names, Kelsey Kelly was torn, partly this, partly that, and then Jessica was, whatever, strongly opposed because of these reasons, and then so on.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be by person. So LUBA decisions do this now. Sometimes you'll have a decision where one of the LUBA members will say, hey, I agree with the outcome, but for different reasons. And
Okay,
there'll be a paragraph about that, or, I disagreed and I think it's important enough. It doesn't happen most of the time, but it's important enough that, I'm going to spend a time writing a paragraph or two to tell you. So I think, if the majority discussion captures your opinion, I think we can carry that forward. But where people are like, hey, board, it was particularly the letter from this fire department was very persuasive in my thinking. I think it deserves special attention. We could certainly capture that.
Yeah.
Dissenting opinion.
Yeah, certainly.
I just think it would be good to give comments, like, here's the motion, it passed 4-3 or 4 to whatever, 4-3 or whatever, and then here's the comments. And then hopefully the comments are relatively brief and can be distilled down into, just like how you guys do for when you make us our memo for the public testimony, you kind of say, here are the arguments in favor, here are the arguments. It's
Yeah.
probably gonna be the same list, even that you can just recycle that slide.
To expand on that and to go to Kelsey's great point, the dry rehashing, mine's the inverse of that. I think about the boneheaded things I just said in the meeting.
Oh, replaying,
Emphasize
the
one,
replaying.
maybe we have a stipulation where we can expunge one thing.
There you go.
Commissioner Hofkamp really regrets this. bonehead thing.
That's funny. I do that too. Yeah. Okay, well, that was
Good
beneficial.
question.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. That was pretty good.
That's why she's.
Because there are some comments where they're like, oh, very repetitive, or man, that like doesn't make much sense, but then there's some really good ones and they get lost because there's so many others that are good and I'm glad to read them, but there's some that are like, ooh,
It was
yes,
gems.
home run,
Yeah.
they thought about it, that's interesting.
Well, and
So if you have this option, you either give us your it's almost like a movie critic soundbite.
Yeah.
Process that just happened. You either give us your thing, or you can pick a quote and, from
Yeah.
the public comment and say, this is it. This is-
Captured it for
That
me.
resonates
Yeah.
with me.
I like Chair Karis's suggestion, that we maybe one final swing through
Yeah.
after the vote. I think it is incumbent on us, though, and it sounds arrogant, but to suggest to staff, I really want this
Yeah.
captured. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is our, I
Simple
agree.
statement.
Yep. Yeah.
When I
Okay.
think of myself during a public hearing, where I'm taking notes and writing the person's name down, their positions, and I'm just starring them once in a while. Oh, there's one. Oh, there's one.
Yeah.
So then I'm just thinking myself, I'd be like, oh, wow, there's about 3 stars here. And that'll be the reminder of the things that really got exciting or interesting or made sense to me.
That got highlighted. Notes.
There you go. Highlighted. See, electronic. Yep. Well, we learned yesterday our 25-year IT person had been running the show for a long time. He just writes notes down during a meeting. So it's funny that our computer guy doesn't use his laptop to take notes, but
It's better for your brain.
oh yeah, no, I agree too. Writing things down. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Sorry.
So we're,
Pen and paper is old technology. It doesn't mean it's not technology.
oh yeah, no, it's good.
You have to remind yourself how to spell. I mean, there's a lot of really good skills that you realize.
So we got about 15 minutes left if we generally finish at 7:30. Thank you, Will, for that memo. Going through it and then working our way back was very valuable. Thank you very much for kind of planning on those deliberations, the next few items that are coming. One of the items I wrote down here is that we're taking time to deliberate. Just a few times recently, we're kind of in the middle of a Wednesday, we get to an item and we're like, oh, I need some more time on this. So like, how about we reconvene at 1:30? So we've been able to fit it in the same day, but we've been able to do that a little bit too. So we're not really rushed for time when we're doing this, just letting you know. And that's kind of my mindset. When we need to study something, get through it. Or if it kind of an avalanche over us, you know, we're gonna say, okay, let's take a minute and make sure we're all ready for this. So at this time, kind of a roundtable, if anybody has ideas, you know, this is the relationship of the Board of Commissioners, our Planning Commission. It's great to see everybody tonight, but any ideas about other topics?
I've got a couple comments if I can.
Sure.
So
We write this down.
no, this will be one of those ones that I regret. You know, when I knew this meeting was coming up, I had hoped for this opportunity to provide respectful but some candid, pointed feedback. And since the invitation's there, and I heard my colleague, Planning Commissioner Matt Cyrus say a little bit ago, I wrote it down as a quote that I didn't want sisters to change that much because I really like that. I want to say a few things. I love Oregon for what it is, as it is. And I'm really cautious when it comes to big changes and particularly skeptical of things that are framed in terms of crises, which is all the rage these days. One crisis or another. And it turns out that a lot of that is just one person's agenda or another. Where I come from, a foundational bedrock principle for me is protection of rural lands. And that's why I was interested in this planning commission. I think that if a person wants the conveniences and services and more abundant housing of an urban area, why they should live in an urban area. If they want the quiet beauty and elbow room of a rural area, then enjoy the country. I'm also where I come from. I think many of you know this, but I'm a big adherent to our 50-year-old venerated statewide land use system, including bedrock principles like citizen involvement, planned development, urban growth boundaries, and rural land protections. You know that it's initiated landmark legislation, Senate Bill 100 in 1973. It's now 50 years old. I think it's a wonderful example of wisdom and forethought in state governance. And Tom McCall, one of my heroes, I know many of you admire him as well, our 6.5-foot tall former governor, best governor we ever had, governor up here when Reagan was governor in California. Really defined two different sort of branches of conservative thought, one ascendant and one, unfortunately, descendant. But and they weren't particularly friendly with one another either. It's kind of interesting. If you ever read his biography, Fire at Eden's Gate, great biography.
I read it.
It's a wonderful read. Interesting guy. Anyway, Tom McCall said, quote, Oregon is demure and lovely, and it ought to play a little hard to get. Love that one. He also said, quote, the interests of Oregon for today and in the future must be protected from the grasping wastrels of the land. We must respect another truism, that unlimited and unregulated growth leads inexorably to a lowered quality of life. Anyway, a lot of what Tom McCall said resonates, I'm sure, with many of us. But lastly, in the vein of respectful but candid feedback, the Planning Commission knows, we all know, the board is the governing body for the county and makes the decisions. The Planning Commission is advisory. But recent board decisions on the Mule Deer Winter Range overlay combining zone and the board decision in regards to new destination resort siting, the proposed prohibition within 24 air miles of an urban growth boundary of a city of 100,000 people or more, consistent with state statute. Those decisions were made, in my view, candidly, counter not only to our recommendation, the Planning Commission recommendation, but to the interests of the residents of Deschutes County. And the interests of wildlife, and the interests of some of the very principles of our land use planning system, with protections for rural lands and consideration for planned urban development. So I'm all about those decisions were then, and let's move forward. But I want to make sure that you get an earful and understand that was disappointing, to say the least, those two
Yeah.
decisions.
Thank you very much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
I've got a couple thoughts.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've kind of come up to speed with the big picture here now, and I've read Fire at Eden's Gate, and I really appreciated it. The Oregon Desert also, there's some really interesting history in this area. When it comes down to it, we're 79% publicly owned, a population of 200,000 in a county of 3,055 square miles. State of Oregon has 4.2 million people in it, and we're losing population. Private property rights. As I say, we're taking this 20% piece of the pie and we're locking it down. And that's the perspective that I kind of see on that. Like, interesting. Right now, we've got all this beautiful public land around us, but we've got people coming from around the country, setting up in Juniper Ridge, China Hat area, east side of Redmond, around Sisters and Lapine. We've legalized drugs. I mean, talk about complicated situation right now. So yeah, as I say, that's kind of the big picture that I see and how I'm grounded here. And I think I talked to you a little bit about maybe two of those topics right before the meeting. So I don't need to say anymore, but I mean, let's keep it open and respectful too. And I don't mind. Let's go to lunch sometime and really talk about the next steps here too.
Group hug.
Which also, that's where the dissent.
Group hug or brew pub, did you say?
That'd be a group hug.
Oh, I thought you said group hug. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. See, I'm glad I clarified. Sorry.
Planning on saying anything, but being inspired by.
Yeah.
Commissioner Hopecamp's comments, I would also say that our community desperately needs housing. And after studying in detail development patterns, land use in the community, housing prices, I am more convinced than ever that attainable housing cannot be created on rural residential zone properties. You cannot take 10 acres of land and make it an affordable housing unit. So, moving forward, I will be even more direct about pointing out that when we are having these discussions about rural residential development, low density rural residential development, we are not talking about attainable housing. And we're not talking about the housing that our community most desperately needs. And it's also very important for us to understand that in a community of 200,000 people, we have 34,000 units of housing, 34,000 dwellings in the unincorporated county. Now, if thousands of those are second homes, unoccupied most of the time, that's not the fault of the people who approved those housing units. That they're underutilized to meet our housing needs. We have 34,000 units of housing in the unincorporated county, and that is quite a lot, and that provides quite a lot of opportunity for people to live a rural residential life if they want.
Anyone else?
Yeah, thank you. Anything else then? So I mean, maybe we're winding down here. Good discussions.
I'm on my third cough drop. I don't.
Okay, well, let's, yeah. So as I say, I'm available for communication, and in fact, I'd love to maybe go to lunch, throughout the year with some folks here in the planning commission. So if you want to do that,
Fun to
let's
talk
all
about
go
this
do that.
stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And thanks for doing this. I think it's a good idea to all get together and appreciate, like I say, the comments on what kind of decisions you guys want to see that are helpful to what you're doing.
Yep.
That was a good discussion.
But I just think of any of these topics could fill the room at any moment. So have you been in a meeting with a room full yet?
I
So,
don't think we could call it a room full.
yeah.
No.
Tumalo was probably the closest. And
Yeah.
It was the energy filled the room, but the.
So, yeah, marijuana land use discussion, we a whole thing, everybody, both sides. It was like a Hatfield, McCoy. I mean, no common ground. So we've seen a few exciting ones over the years.
Mule deer filled up the room
Yeah.
twice in a row.
Yep.
Yeah, it was. And we had how many people on Zoom on Mule Deer?
Yeah, so
We had a whole bunch of people on Zoom and a whole bunch of people here both times.
Well, would everyone please call ODOT? Last night when Nick was driving from Sisters, I had said, oh, please be careful because there was a herd of 80 elk out there. And so he said, and then I see my phone, I get a text from Nick, the car in front of him had hit a deer, no.
Oh, yeah.
And so then I said, it's really too bad that we can't get ODOT to put in some temporary signs that say, hey, guys, we've got the elk out here.
Yeah.
You don't want to hit one.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll kill you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they'll kill you or they'll destroy
The
you.
deer just make a mess of your car. The
But-
elk will kill you.
Anyway, if everyone would call ODOT tomorrow and say, hey, because the elk are back. And I really, I feel really badly. We had 1,100 elk, deer that are killed a year in our county. So, definitely they're back. And when they're on both sides of 126 or over on, yeah, it was just so amazing that this all happened last night. So.
Or
everyone
better yet,
just
get
call ODOT.
ODFW to move the wolves on so the elk can go back to.
Oh,
Little
no,
Bridge.
they're already in here.
have a good
I
evening.
have to go pick up my kids.
Yeah. Good job. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so we could adjourn. Thank you very much for that last topic.
Yeah, they've moved the elk into our
Just sitting here
community.
listening now.
Place the deer and leave the elk.